Senator Rennick.
Yeah, hi guys, how you going? I know before, Ms Rainsford, you said that the role of the Australian Communications and Media Authority was to assess whether the telcos are compliant with existing law. That's correct?
Yes.
Yep. And Mr Brearley, you said that it's not your role to tell the telcos what to do. Are you saying that all you can do, ACMA can do, is effectively monitor but not actually take action to rectify problems? Is that correct?
I think, Senator, our primary role, of course, is assessing compliance with the regulatory framework.
Yeah, so that's a question
for the sectors there. That doesn't mean that, where there might not be, if you like, some influence we might have, that we wouldn't take action. So, while we weren't seeing any compliance issues here, of course, we shared our concern with the telcos about what they about their plans and how they were supporting their customers.
So that's my question. Do you have the power to take authority to rectify issues by the telcos or not?
Well, we don't have, based on what we've seen the telcos are doing at the moment. I'm sorry, I think this is the answer to your question, but if not, I'll
okay.
Is we don't have the powers to investigate or take formal remediation action because we're not seeing any indications that their actions are not compliant with the current law. That said, that doesn't mean that we won't, continue to work with them and the department to try and achieve the best possible outcome for telco consumers.
Okay, so let's say, for example, they weren't compliant with the current law. You do then have action.
Oh yes, of course.
The power to take action.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So then, given that there's a risk that people may fall between the cracks with this upgrade in terms of not being able to access banking services, health services, make emergency calls, are you saying that the law is not sufficient to cover the right of or the responsibility of telcos to make sure that Australians can access these essential services?
I think certainly they are questions on our mind, and they are things that we will be exploring, particularly through the review of the emergency call service determination, which we've started and will move to a public consultation phase on. If through the learnings on this process it turns out there are other aspects of our regulatory remit which would warrant an update, that is certainly something the authority would look at.
Okay, so I seem to recall that when Telstra was privatised, there was a community service obligation that was basically implemented to make sure that every customer across Australia, all Australians, can access certain telecommunication standards. Is it fair to say, and I don't know, does this community service obligation include the right of Australians, especially in regional Australia, to access what I've just mentioned before, banking services, health services, and the right to emergency calls?
No, I think the answer to that's no. So
okay,
particularly I think that goes to fixed telephone services and the availability of payphones. Okay,
but is there still an obligation by the telcos to uphold community service obligation,
There are certainly still regulations in place that require them to meet certain baseline obligations, particularly, as I said, about access to, I think it's fixed telephone services, but they don't. Those obligations don't currently extend out to mobile services or the broader use of telco networks for the modern technology uses.
And is it fair to say that community service obligations are a mandatory code of conduct or a voluntary code of conduct? Presumably it's mandatory.
I don't think there's not such a regulatory instrument that exists anymore. It might have around the time of deregulation in 1991, 97.
Yeah,
we've got the universal service obligation now, which requires phone services to be provided.
Yeah. Because I know we just finished up a banking inquiry where what was a voluntary code of conduct by the banks was totally trashed and ignored, and I'm just wondering if we're facing the same thing with telcos. Yes. And that's a similar risk.
So sorry, probably just to clarify what I was saying, I might have got a bit lost in the language there, Senator. There are certainly some existing obligations which are enforceable. They're not self-regulatory. We administer them, which go to particular standards or services that telcos need to meet in certain circumstances. At the moment, that doesn't exist for
mobile services.
Well, it's probably not quite that simple, but it's not. There's not a basic right to or obligation to make sure someone's provided with a mobile service. There is some regulation that goes to when mobile services are provided, how that's managed, including things like the right to be able to port your number from one telco to another. But it's not there's no obligation to provide the service at that level. It is quite a complex regulatory framework. So,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you. That's all I need to know. Cheers.
Authorised G. Rennick People First Chermside.